3 вересня.
It's September 3rd, Ukraine Media Center continues its operation. My name is Svetlana, and now we will have a briefing of the owners and organizers of the book forum, KyivBookFest. So let me introduce our speakers. It's Vladyslav Kyrychenko, owner of Nash format publishing house, organizer of KyivBookFest. Bondarchuk, executive director of the NGO Reformation. Anatolii Symovoniuk, Serviceman, major representative of the NGO Reformation. And Serhii Kruhlov, deputy head of the Kyiv Institute of the National Guard of Ukraine for Personnel Management, Lieutenant Colonel. So, Mr. Vladyslav, let's start with you. Starting on the 5th of September, the second Kyiv Book Fest is starting. So, what is this year's goal and what will be special about it? Good afternoon. Well, the goal of the second Book Fest is a professional event of the publishers, and we have an education component multiplied by the military, because I also represent the Reformation NGO that for the 5th year supplies the field regulations to Ukrainian troops. And one of the components of our event is to gather the charity funds. We don't sell tickets. The entrance is for donation, and all of the money goes to the account of NGO that converts them into training books for the military. Well, basically now all of our lives are rotating about the war, or I would say about the victory, and this year's Book Fest is also about our military and the victory, and the topic is books are the weapon. Basically, it's a slogan, not a topic, because book is really a knowledge, book is education, it's really a weapon. And the conclusion of this war is that we should have started 25 years earlier, because the maximum losses in this war comes from the generals, colonels, and others down the chain of command who never read any books. So what will be the format of this festival, how it will be different from the last years, what should be something special that we should expect? Well, the scenario will be the same for the wider crowds of those who are not curious about the donations and the events. We have the huge location with the fair. However, I don't like that word. You know, it started when the Ukrainian books were sold as the Indian goods in the fairs, and another floor will be the space for discussions, music performances, the topics of the books for the military, and so on and so forth. So what will be the number of participants of the festival, and what special guests should we expect? Well, now is the time that we should not better disclose any information about some big guests. Well, so it's going to be a surprise. Well, hopefully it's going to be a good surprise, a pleasant surprise, because this time we are used to getting unpleasant surprises. So 130 participants, 200 different events, and the super event of this year, well, in my opinion, it's a super event, is the presentation of the book about Serhii Kuzminsky, Все четко, Everything's Cool, including the jam session. Well, I'm not going to tell you who will be the members of the jam session. I think that will be the biggest event of this forum. Well, you will find everything in the announcement materials. Well, Miss Anna, the Reformation NGO, is joining this event for the second time. So can you please tell us about the results of the last year's festival, and what are the goals that you set for yourself for this year? Well, last year the festival gathered around 800,000 hryvnia that we've spent to print out the field regulations for the armed forces. We had a number of books that were in demand: the Battle Regulation 2 and 3, Ranger Manual 2nd edition, and those were the books that we printed out for those funds. This year's goal is way more ambitious. We expect to gather 1.5 million hryvnias to refill the libraries of 5 higher educational military institutions with the books from the list that was identified by our experts. So can you please tell us a little bit more about the list, how it was identified, and how did you identify the list of the higher educational institutions to take part in this program? The list of the higher educational institutions was identified by personal contacts with every single one of them, so those who were in touch with us, we were able to agree handover of the books to them, and they ended up on our list. I can announce them. That's Kyiv Institute of National Guard of Ukraine, whose representatives are present at this forum, the Military Institute of the University of Taras Shevchenko, Military Academy of Odessa, Military Institute of Zhytomyr, and National Defense University. We work with those higher educational institutions for a number of years, with some of them for a couple of years, and we keep in touch with the representatives. And according to our program, the troops keep reading, because we handed over to the military within the last year, not only to the higher educational institutions, but also to the hospitals and to the military units, more than 50,000 books. So that activity was deployed way before the festival emerged. Talking about the list of the books is quite expanded. It has 350 different titles posted in our website. And talking about the value of this list, I would rather give the floor to Vladyslav, because he was directly involved in this process. Yes, please. Well, actually, our list looks a bit like West Point must-read list, because the armies of the Western world, without reading certain list of books, well, you're not gonna overcome, well, you're not gonna move up in the hierarchy. So there is a list for a colonel, general, major, corporal. I mean, it's not formal. You have to report on what you've read and what are the conclusions that you've drawn, and we have certain adjustment to Ukrainian realities. Is being 10 years of the war, have a lot of friends among the military who don't only shoot at the tanks, but also who read the books, including books in foreign languages. So it's quite an expanded circle of those who read different books on military leadership, psychology, tactics of the combat. I mean, there is no secret methodology about what to read. All those books should be read by the military in order to become the generals, and I actually dream about the time when this towards intellectual general is not going to result in a burst of love. Well, I hope that the military soon will become the elite in Ukraine. Well, thank you. I think it's about time we talk directly to the military. Mr. Anatolii, let me ask you a question. As a military, do you experience any demand for books among the military, even staying in the front lines and staying in the rear? Is it true that the military read a lot? And if they do so, what do they read? Well, actually, the demand for books is quite high, because with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, basically a lot of people joined the armed forces who were not professional military. They were just highly motivated to defend their homeland. They were motivated to join the troops, and at the same time, they had quite a small baggage of knowledge. As long as they're motivated, they were ready to study. So we had this program of field regulations and training manuals. This is what the NGOs focused on, because the people wanted to study, but unfortunately there were no sufficient training materials. So basically the demand is there. Obviously not every serviceman reads books, because the armed forces is the section of the society. Fortunately, now the culture of reading is developing in Ukraine, and in the same way it becomes fashionable to study in the armed forces. So again, the demand is there. The people read for sure. They read quite different, quite a broad range of literature, from professional, from field manuals, from manuals on application of specific weapons, and ending with some books like memoirs of some generals of the past, like Skoropadsky memoirs, quite a popular book, by the way. Another popular book is the memoirs of Mannerheim, one of my favorite ones. Also popular are the books such as American Sniper by Chris Kyle. I advise for everybody. We were soldiers. Again, in my opinion, it's a great book because it's the book that demonstrates the first big combat of the American army, that the American army was not ready to. Well, some may have read the book, some may have watched the movies. So it's about the readjustment of the processes, how the people will learn to survive, to fight, to live together. So talking about some must-read books, I've listed them. So Mannerheim, Skoropadsky, American Sniper. I personally love such things. Well, it's something close to me as a member of Reformation NGO, for example, Foundation by Isaac Asimov, when they were planning periods for 1,000 years to preserve human potential. Me and my colleagues from Reformation were more optimistic. We hope that in 50 years we are not going to be able to see the results of our activities, but hopefully the green sprints of our enlightenment activities are going to start to grow. Well, you're focused on the enlightenment component, but talking about the speculative fiction, is it an instrument of moral and psychological support for the military who undergo rehabilitation, or, for example, those who are rotating? Well, obviously so. We live in a modern world, and modern information space is filled with basically, let's talk directly, it's low quality content. TikTok, YouTube, sure, something that is easily consumable, but they are not saved in your memory, in your conscience. They don't teach you anything, but they're cool. I mean, they're easy. You can get stuck in TikTok for hours. But the amount of information that enters your brain within the short period, it doesn't let you relax and unload your brain. Meanwhile, the book makes your brain work in a different way. And just yesterday, first day after my vacation that I haven't been having for 1 year and a half, I've been reading a lot during my vacation. I sit and read, or I lay back and read, and I was reading speculative fiction, and I imagine the way it happens, I feel myself better relaxed, better rested. That's why this method of rehabilitation through reading high quality fiction is real cool. I mean, in my opinion, that's a must-have. Thank you very much, Mr. Serhii. Let's proceed to you. As it was mentioned, the key goal of the festival is to support the higher educational institutions in acquisition of the necessary literature. So what are the needs of your higher educational institutions? Is it true that now that higher educational military institutions are missing the necessary books? Good afternoon, everybody. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Well, in response to your question, let me tell you, our Institute of the National Guard, our Kyiv Institute of National Guard, is only 3 years old. We were not created a long time ago, and you may understand that the libraries of the Institute are not so big so far. we continue having more and more cadets with each year, and the need of our library is growing too. Talking about the needs, well, obviously is there. In our conditions, due to the full-scale invasion, we understand that the state allocates more funds to the battalions, those who fulfill the battle tasks, and we understand that material, ammunition, weapons, that's what's needed. The equipment, and it costs, well, it costs a lot, let's put it like that. And unfortunately, it's not always so that the training materials, well, the funds are allocated for training materials, but they don't always suffice for everything. That's the first thing. And second, you understand that the war, as is going on, it develops, and the manuals that existed 5 or 10 years ago, they are outdated, they're obsolete, and we have to train our cadets on the more modern examples, on the more modern methods of waging the war. And we really need that literature, and the more up-to-date it is, the better and useful it is for us. We have to make sure that the officers that we train, and the officers are commanders, which contemplates like 90% or 80% of fulfillment of the battle task, depends on the decision taken by the platoon commander, company commander, battalion commander. So we definitely need that up-to-date modern literature. Mr. Vladyslav, let me get back to you. And Ms. Anna, among the books represented in the festival, there will be books authored by the veterans and the active military. So what will be the place, what will be their place in the festival? How the festival will help make their voices heard better during the festival? Well, one of the specifics of our forum is that we have a clear military inclination. Military were widely represented, as well as military writers. We have a huge blog, the military book. We have a lot of events related to the presentation of the books of the military, of both military and the books about the military and about the war. There will be a number of huge presentations. For example, Nash format dedicates the new book to Maxim Kruhlov Dali. That will be a big event. We have basically a lot of publishers, the owners of the publishing houses, who are currently at the war. So some have been there for more than 3 years, some for 2 years, some for year and a half. So we have dozens of books for the military, about the military, authored by the military, and so on and so forth. So, and Ms. Anna, please let me add a couple of words. In the website of KyivBookFest, we have the filters where you can sort those events that you're interested in. And there is a filter, book and war, and you can filter all those events dedicated to the military authors, the books about the military authors, books about the war. And as Vladyslav mentioned, there will be a dedicated stand in the area of NGOs, and there will be books sold at that stand authored by the active military or the veterans, so you can get familiarized in better detail. So, and talking about the enlightenment function in a different way, the books written by the military, the books about the war, what is their function for the people in the rear, for the civil society? How does it help the people who fortunately do not see the war from the inside, but to integrate into reality of the country waging a war? Well, you know, for me, books by the military and books about the war, I see them under a different angle. It's not like books for adaptation of the civil population. It's the layer of culture that documents, is the layer of culture that documents the traumatic experience of the full generation. We were growing in the warm bath without the war for 2 generations, and it's important to make sure that this literature becomes something that the new generations of Ukrainian heroes grow on. I think that for the first time in the history of humanity and in the history of Ukraine, Ukrainians as a nation, not as a group, even with all due respect to our Ukrainian insurgents army and guerrillas, it was not a national war for independence of the country. And it's the first time in the history when the Ukrainians as the nation fight for their right to exist. And all that literature, unlike the literature that educated my generation of Komsomol, I think that that literature will help educate the new generation of citizens who will be ready to defend their country whenever it's necessary. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do we have any questions on the floor? Good afternoon. My name is Maria. I'm a freelance journalist, and my question is to you, Mr. Vladyslav. It was clearly stated that it's a charity book festival, and it's actually a very good example in the industry when you accumulate the donations to armed forces in Ukraine in a more classical form. I mean, it's the donations are not going to go for procurement of weapons. And we know in Ukraine there is a book arsenal, the biggest book event, and we have to understand that book arsenal is the project of Art Arsenal, which is a state institution. And I'm having a question to you. What will be your advice to your colleagues? Because they have a huge resource. This year, Book Arsenal was attended by 35,000 people, and each a huge resource when the money gained could be channeled to something like you allocate your charity donations. And now it's a third year of the war. People are tired, and those who organize fundraisers, they know how difficult it is. And in that case, there is a huge resource. Well, you asked a lot of questions in this one small question about the efficiency of the government-controlled institutions as well. And I'm a keen adherent of the principle when the government or the state as a player in the market should influence the processes going on in the economy. However, I'm right, and I'm standing for the less government control, and I'm not a publisher, you know, I'm more about exhibitions and technologies. So talking about the IT, for example, literature exhibitions, it's all private initiatives. And when the government provides somebody with the premises, areas for exhibitions, well, it's, with all due respect to my colleagues, they do what they like in the government-controlled area. We are a forum of publishers. It's a professional forum. If Arsenal is closer to the publishers, there would be no KyivBookFest at all. But within the last couple of years, we never had any professional event. That's why, with the view of professional specifics of the organizers, our forum claims to be the key sector event. We have philanthropic, military, and other components. I mean, we have different backgrounds with the teams of Book Arsenal. And another question. Thank you, for your answer, Mr. Vladyslav. And I'm having another question to you, Mr. Major and Mr. Colonel. So you're saying that it's important basically to teach younger generations with high quality literature. We're having this chance now. We have a lot of publishers who publish wonderful books, and they are real good. They're up to date. And my question to you as representatives of the military link in our country, with whom should we start this, the civil sector should start this dialogue? I understand that not everybody should start this dialogue. Whom the civil sector should start the dialogue with somebody from the government, maybe somebody from the armed forces, Ministry of Defense, because the books that the military have access to is not only a way to make sure that the military becomes more developed, they develop the strategic thinking, tactics, is the tool of recreation, because the army is quite an autocratic system. It's about discipline, rules, structure, and people get deprived of a lot of things there. And the books is a tool that they can use for recreation and rest. So such a question, maybe you know this answer, and I will pass it on to my friends from civil organizations. Thank you very much. Thank you for your question. For what I understand, you mean who is supposed to talk to the publishers for procurement, or what do you mean? Well, and so too, and I understand that basically the Ministry of Defense is supposed to issue an order or something to, like, all right, this is one of our strategies. We understand that we have limited resources. The majority of resources are going to be spent for the weapons. That's putting it simply. But we have to understand that it's important too, because our warriors, our defenders, they are exhausted, and we need to support them in some way. Well, basically, this is my question. Well, I think that's clear to me. Well, basically, every military units, every higher educational institutions have their libraries. Well, the books are classified by some topics. There are regulations that identify such topics, and obviously, every military unit, they procure those books for their needs. So there are respective employees, like the heads of the culture centers, who are responsible for this literature reserve, and they see what's missing, and based on the amount of funds that they get allocated for their libraries, they procure the books. But the process is getting managed by a person responsible, so you don't basically have to address anybody. You don't have to prepare any legislation. Everything is done without any problems there. However, unfortunately, yes, now we're waging a war, as I've mentioned before. As I've said, a lot of money is allocated for the weapons. We understand that without the weapons, we cannot destroy the enemy. You know, you cannot march ahead with the rifle only, taking into account the modern methods of combat. This is why we appeal to different charity foundations to fill those gaps in our libraries. And I would like to thank the organizers of this event. They help a lot. A lot of modern books are provided to us. And as Elena said, it does not only help us to train personnel, not only in higher educational institutions, because there are trainings going on in the military units as well. The platoon commanders, the company commanders, they command those exercises, and the literature is not always sufficient because the civilians keep coming, and the military who used to serve during the Soviet times, they used to study that literature, the methods of war dating back to the 1940s, 1960s. Now the war is getting modern. This is why those books are useful not only in military units, but in higher education institutions too. And the graduate, the platoon commander, lieutenant who comes to a military unit, they already have that knowledge from those books, and they can pass on that knowledge to their subordinates, which is also very important. Mr. Major has something to add. In my opinion, the function of the government should be expressed not only in procurement of the books, because it will be a topic subject to a lot of speculations, like why these books, why not those, why have we procured Ayn Rand, the Atlas Shrugged, and not Mannerheim, for example, or the other way around. How do we want to formulate the picture of the world in our people, whether we want to educate them as left-oriented or right-oriented, Republicans or Democrats? That's again subject to a lot of speculations. The function of the government would be ideal if they create demand among the cadets of the higher educational institutions. Well, it's way more difficult during the war because the active military are waging a war, or rather than involved in self-development, but to create the demand through establishment of book clubs, organization of discussions, to make sure that there is a demand. For example, I'm coming from business myself, and there are like 7 steps of sales. So there is such a thing as formulating of demand for the client. Even when the client doesn't need, they need to buy it. So there is a stage that we call formulation of demand. And we should formulate that demand for reading, like Vladyslav mentioned, through requirement for further growth. I mean, it's a list of books read, or publication about those books, or participation in some discussion forums, or something like that, like one of the elements. And formulating such, to formulate such needs, maybe the internal competition, like I'm cooler because I read more. And this is what the government can do without speculating on that topic. And let's talk honestly, the budgets for literature are not so colossal costs. I'm more than sure that if we ask the big businesses of Ukraine to support our enlightenment education projects, they are about to do so. It's not even the million of drones, really. I mean, that's a whole different type of figures. So the state should formulate the demand, not like to make people read, not to force them read, but to create the demand. Do we have any more questions on the floor? Thank you. Please, good afternoon. My name is Victoria. I represent Village of Ukraine Publish House, and I'm having a question. Like, imagine people come to the festival, and what is their route? Whether all those stands about the military, with the military literature gathered in like one spot, or how can people donate? Is it like a QR code, or people buy pictures, and the money goes to charity? Vladyslav passed the floor to me, so I answer your question. So let me respond it twice. One in terms of our everyday activity, and one in terms of Kyiv Book Fest. So talking about Kyiv Book Fest, we will have QR codes everywhere through using which you can donate for procurement of books for the military. And if you take part in the events held in our forum, in the official part of it, you are supposed to buy a ticket. Well, you're supposed to donate for a ticket, not to buy it, and all those funds will be channeled for procurement of the books for the military. Also, in Kyiv Book Fest, we will have a stand where we gather physically the books for the military. And in this case, you will be able to buy any book that you like and to hand it over together with the culture assault. I'm about to finalize it. Books to the front line, their project. And talking about our everyday activity in our Reformation NGO, there is a donate button, and you can donate for procurement of books for the military. For what I understand, the question was about a different thing. where the books for the military will be concentrated. It's area A2. Why I asked you? Only because you were involved in operations activities. So area A2, NGOs, culture assault, and a lot of other things will be present there. So mostly those locations will be the places of the concentration of books by the military and for the military. Tell us about the culture assault. Well, look, I'm trying to answer the question. I'm trying to answer the question, trying to give the answer that I don't know, and you know it for sure, but you can complement each other. That will be a good answer one way or another. Well, the culture assault stand will be located in the first floor, and on the third floor there will be 2 collection points where you can put the book that you want to present to the military. And in the A2 area, A2 hall, there will be all events held related to the military topics. The stand with the military books will also be located at hall A2 at the second floor of the forum. All of the books by the Ukrainian military will be represented in the military stand. Thank you. That was the most comprehensive answer to your question. Well, perhaps we have more questions on the floor. In case we don't have any, I would like to thank our guests. I wish you hold your festival successfully and you raise even more than you aim to. Let me remind you, we just recently have held a forum or a presentation of the second book fest at Ukraine Media Center.